And we're back for day 2 of the 2024 Virtual National Work Zone Management Conference. This conference is a joint partnership of FHWA, TTI, and ARTBA. And we're just glad to have you here for this first session, the session on accommodating Americans with disabilities and pedestrians. So let me introduce you now to your moderator. From FHWA, you all know her well, Martha Kapitanoff. She's currently a transportational specialist at FHWA headquarters on the Work Zone Management team. She's worked for FHWA for over 25 years, and in her current capacity, she provides leadership and guidance to the development and implementation of effective work zone management practices and innovations on a national level. Martha is the FHWA lead for the Work Zone Speed Safety Cameras Initiative, National Work Zone Awareness Week, Access and Egress Points in Work Zones Initiative, and manages a few work zone safety grants. She holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Puerto Rico. And I do want to mention really quick, if you're looking to ask questions, I should have mentioned this earlier, there's a Q&A box on the side there. That's your only path. Put all your questions in the Q&A box, and our moderator will be happy to pass them along. Without further ado, turn it over to you, Martha.
Thank you, Matt. Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. Again, welcome to day 2 of this great national virtual conference. Today we'll have Michelle Moser is the State Works and Engineer at the Minnesota Department of Transportation. In this position, she provides leadership, technical expertise, and support to MDOT and its state, local, and vendor partners in managing work zone traffic control operations to meet the safety and mobility goals for workers and the traveling public. She has over 20 years of professional engineering experience in a variety of disciplines in both the private and public sectors. After Michelle, we'll have Tim Cox. Tim started in the traffic safety industry in 1979, working with pavement markings until 2003. He then transitioned to work zone safety devices. He has served as Secretary of the National Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices and on the boards of industry associations like RTBA and ATSA. He currently works as a consultant through his company, Cox Transportation Safety. He previously worked for Plastic Safety Services and Catafi Incorporated. He learned his BA and MA in Spanish at the University of Northern Iowa. So please welcome Michelle, and then we'll have Tim. And then, as Matt mentioned, please add your questions in the chat box, and we'll take the questions after both presenters have share their information. Thank you.
All right, good morning and afternoon, everyone. We've got a short session today, so we're gonna fly through this. All right, so I will talk a little bit about the requirements and some design considerations for accommodating vulnerable road users, peds, bikes, people with disabilities, and then I think Tim is gonna cover some devices. So in the MUTCD, which is really our overarching standard for all types of traffic control, including temporary traffic control, Chapter 6 covers temporary traffic control. And the first standard in that chapter is 6A01, a general standard. Needs and control of all road users, motorists, bicyclists, and pedestrians, including people with disabilities, through a TTC zone shall be an essential part of our work. So right up front, first standard, we are told that we need to accommodate everybody. In 6A02, fundamental principles of temporary traffic control, it talks a little bit about bicyclists and pedestrians, and those including those with disabilities, should be provided with access and passage through the work zone. 6C of the new MUTCD talks a lot about pedestrians and workers. So these are just a few snippets. So pedestrian considerations prior to closing any sidewalk or pedestrian facility. Of course, the maintaining agency should advise people of the future closure. And if the temporary traffic control zone affects the movements of pedestrians, adequate pedestrian access and walkways shall be provided. So again, really solidifying that we shall be providing accommodations for pedestrians. 6C03 talks about accessibility. When existing pedestrian facilities are disrupted, closed, or relocated, those temporary facilities shall be detectable and shall include accessibility features consistent with the features present in the existing pedestrian facility. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk about design considerations later. And then a barrier that's detectable by a person with a vision disability should be or shall be used in that closure to make sure that we do not have people wandering into our closures where it's unsafe for them. There we go. In 6N, further on in the chapter where we start to really talk about the nitty-gritty work affecting pedestrians and bicycle facilities. Where pedestrian routes are closed, alternate pedestrian routes shall be provided. So again, really solidifying the fact that we do need to provide an alternate route. When existing pedestrian facilities are disrupted, closed, or relocated, those facilities shall be detectable and include accessibility features. So again, solidifying that. And then in 6N10, work within the traveled way of an urban street, talks a little bit more about the movement of bicyclists. Adequate access to the roadway or shared use paths shall be provided for them. And then also transit stops. So it's very important to provide access for both pedestrians and vehicles to get to those transit stops. So aside from those snippets from the MUTCD, and of course there's much, much more in Chapter 6, PROWAG, the Public Rights of Way Accessibility Guidance, which is part of the Americans with Disabilities Act, also talks about accessibility. This contains guidance on both temporary and permanent facilities, so it does address work zones in that temporary capacity. And it does say when a pedestrian circulation path is temporarily not accessible due to construction or maintenance, etc., an alternate pedestrian access route must be provided and comply with some further criteria in that document. It does give an exception if it's infeasible to establish or maintain an alternate pedestrian route, you can determine alternate means. A lot of times that might mean having an escort or a shuttle to get people around your work zone. At MnDOT, we have adopted PROWAG even prior to it potentially soon being adopted by the US DOT. And aside from these standards and laws, it's just the right thing to do, right? Pedestrians and bicyclists are users of the transportation system. Walking, rolling, riding are all valid ways to get to your destination. So we really need to be cognizant of that and accommodate all of our transportation system users. So really quickly, a few design considerations. When you're planning for accommodations, you want to make sure that you evaluate pedestrian and bicycle routes and needs early in the stages of your project development. So in scoping and pre-design, make sure you're documenting things in your transportation management plan. So at a minimum, if you're impacting PEDs, as we're told in the MUTCD, we need to provide alternate pedestrian routes. We need to determine the level of accessibility needed. So we really need to go out, take a look at what's happening in that area where we're going to have our work zone and determine those needs and document them. Also document conditions that don't meet recommended standards. So of course, this is not an easy thing to do, and we can't always meet everything. We can't be perfect in everything we do, but we don't want perfection to get in the way of progress. So doing our best to accommodate and then documenting the places where we don't is valid engineering judgment, right? Include pedestrians and bike accommodations in the traffic control plan. Again, this is not something that's super easy to do, and it does take pre-planning. So we shouldn't really expect contractors to be able to bid correctly or construct this temporary traffic control zone if we're not letting them know what they need to do. And then consider staging to minimize impact. So if it's proving hard to accommodate pedestrians, maybe looking at staging or timing your work differently to minimize impacts or keep accesses open to important facilities. Quickly, so where do we put pedestrians? Along the Same route is always best. We're creatures of habit. We like to go the same way to our destination. If that's not feasible, sidewalk bypasses keep people at least in that same general area. And then detours are last and least preferred. There is a statement in the MUTCD that said pedestrian detours should be avoided since pedestrians rarely observe them. Of course, people will get through our work zone if they can. And those longer detours are difficult for elderly people or those with health conditions or disabilities to maybe traverse a longer distance. MUTCD typical application 28 and 29 give you some recommendations to assist in your plans. Quickly, bikeway continuity may be a little bit different there. When you're on a bike, you can traverse a longer distance. If we have signed bike routes, we want to try to maintain continuity. You can potentially accommodate closures or temporary closures with flagging operations, or a detour in which you would need some advanced notification, signing, and other coordination, because usually these bike routes are shown on bike maps, etc. And then if you just have known bike use, again, including that in your traffic control plan, accommodating them, giving them a place that they can get through the work zone, or giving them a detour. And if you need to fully close a bike lane or bike path, of course, closing that with signing. A few routing considerations. Of course, we want to maintain access to existing destinations and facilities. Very important, as we're told in the MUTCD, for transit. Parking, so we want to relocate any disabled parking, making sure that people can get to building and business entrances and schools. And then minimizing traffic and work area hazards, so shielding, protecting, and or advising peds and bikes when that alternate route might increase exposure to hazards. Considering traffic speeds and volumes, that will impact the devices that you use. Looking for those direct conflicts with traffic and potentially using pedestrian signals, temporary crosswalks, and looking at that work vehicle access to make sure that pedestrians are not in conflict with those work vehicles. And then work area separation and debris, dust, and noise protection. Of course, if the workers need PPE to be protected from this stuff, we want to make sure that we take pedestrians away from that because they will not likely have that PPE. And then lastly, communication is really key here. So using informational signing, placing that signing as far in advance in both time and space as possible. Utilizing audible information devices. So there is some information about that in Chapter 6C03, talking about how pedestrians with visual disabilities, etc., are not able to see printed signs or other indications that we're giving them. And then using tactile devices. So making sure that we aren't using tape, rope, plastic chain, strung between devices, etc., snow fence, that kind of thing, because that is not accessible for those with disabilities. So that was a quick rundown of your standards, etc., and I'll hand it over to Tim to talk about some of the devices.
Good afternoon. I need to have a little bit more patience with the system. So Michelle gave us a good background on what's the requirement, in particular how PROAG fits into this, and as PROAG becomes subject to rulemaking by DOJ and DOT, then we need to kind of step back and see how those things fit together with what the MUTCD has. Luckily, as the MUTCD 11th edition was put together, the anticipation of PROAG means that many of the things that are going to be in the PROAG rulemaking will already be covered, although we'll have to do some adjustments, I'm sure. But I'd like to focus on the things that are different in the 11th edition for practitioners who are setting up a work zone. What are the things that they need to be conscious of and aware of? with the new emphasis on vulnerable road users, there's 3 items that that I think practitioners should be conscious of: the pedestrian channelizer barricade, audible information device, and then the new expanded details in typical applications 28 and 29. So the pedestrian channelizing device is a new section, and it's intended to address the channelizers that can work with pedestrians, both fully abled as well as pedestrians with vision and mobility issues. The 3 things that they need to watch, be very conscious of, is that the channelizing device needs to be detectable to users with long canes, and the other way that most of the people of low vision guide is using hand trailing. So it needs to be able to facilitate both of those groups. And Michelle mentioned it, I'm going to mention it a couple of 3 times. The single biggest benefit we can provide to pedestrians, and especially pedestrians with vision issues, is a sidewalk closure that covers the entire width of the closure, that prevents someone from entering into the workspace. So when you look in the manual, the figure 6K2 describes the pedestrian channelizing device. And as one of the people that helped put this drawing together, I'm chagrined to note that it's more confusing than it is helpful. What we were trying to do when we put this together is to accommodate all the different methods that pedestrian channelizing barricades may be installed, and how their support device may fit. So there's a lot of information here that's not necessarily helpful to the practitioner. Once we realize that, the Temporary Traffic Control Committee worked to come up with a cleaner image that we will propose to Federal Highways for adoption in future texts. As you can see here, the only thing we're showing is the profile of the channelizing device as it faces the pedestrian, and then it shows the fact that it needs to be continuous and detectable by cane on the bottom and by the hand trailing on the top. Also, there's an option put in there for vertical sheeting, and some of the states have already started to adopt that. So as a practitioner or as an agency setting up a qualified product list, here's some examples of some devices that are compliant. On the top row, all of them you'll notice have a common vertical plane. The sheeting is on the device, both top and bottom. And here you can see the support for the device. It's behind the channelizer, not in the pedestrian way. So the devices on the bottom would be a problem for particularly low vision and blind pedestrians, because this foot would be in their pathway and they may or may not catch it before they would, and it could cause a tripping hazard. So the audible information device is again a new item in the 11th edition. In the prior edition, it was said it's a good practice to have provide information by audible devices, but in the 11th edition, it says in the text, should be communicated with audible information devices, and the background for that is printed signs are really helpful for those of us with normal vision, but if you're low or no vision, you can't receive the message on how to proceed. Here are a variety of of information devices. This is the familiar one we're using that's fixed on as a part of a signal. But the others are available now. The key thing to look for in choosing an audible information device needs to be able to detect pedestrians as they approach it. It should be able to adjust the volume because the workspace can go from fairly quiet in the evening to fairly loud during construction work. So should be able to adjust the volume. And it's key that it's tamper resistant so that we don't have people creating their own messages. This is a typical application 28. I'm going to talk about both the text and the figure. The text this time treats the audible information device a little differently. Well, first of all, it repeats once again the sidewalk closure barricade needs to cover the full width of the sidewalk. It gives information about what was required to make should a ramp be needed, what that level of service the ramp needs to give in terms of slope and width, etc. And then it addresses the audible information devices, and this time it uses shall rather than should. Sidewalk closure signs shall include an audible information device, so as they approach that sidewalk closure, low vision people pedestrians can know what their next move might be. And in mid-block sidewalk closures, the same thing. So this is typical application 28. On the left hand is a detour moving them from around the alternating sidewalks as opposed to moving up to the lane closure itself. On the right hand side is a diversion, and so this shows, and then I just made it a little bit larger on the right. This shows this is all very new from the prior MUTCD. It specifically calls for pedestrian channelizer barricades around the entire route, both between the pathway and the workspace and the pathway and the motoring traffic. The two other subsets of this that are important, and one is this crosshatching, which means that should there be a surface that is not hard surface, like grass or others, that are not compatible with motorized devices, that this should meet the same requirements, firm, stable, and slip resistance that's called for. The ramp has a turn. In this case, the diversion is into the parking space. So there's a platform at the top of the ramp that allows the people to redirect their wheelchair and other mobility devices, and then a ramp down to the surface, and the reverse when you get to the other end. So the idea of speaking about ramps and how they and pedestrian channeling devices fit together is what is new in the new manual. When you're looking at a ramp, there are several things that are really critical, and they talked a little bit in the notes about it, but the slope of the ramp has to be 8% or less. The platform has to have no more than a 2% slope, the turning space, and then the surface of the ramp itself has to meet that firm, stable, and slip resistance. And I'll show a little bit more about that in a little bit. So once again, I got a little too aggressive. I want to go one more. most common ramps and alternate pathways that we see right now are made of plywood and constructed on site, which is a very good option as long as the plywood is treated, because the plywood you see that's untreated becomes a slip risk when it's damp or raining. So it's really not ADA compliant. Another good option is the use of asphalt. The asphalt has to make sure that it's stable, though, and that it's not going to be affected by pedestrian movements, and it must meet the slope and standard, not like you see here on the left, but rather more like on the right. So there's a couple of them that industry can now provide. Industry is a little bit in the catch-up mode on this, but there are ramp alternatives available. And I'll go quickly through this. Indiana has done a lot of work on their typical applications for work in the state, and so here's an example of a mid-block closure. They show the placement of the audible information devices and how they're routing the pedestrian travel. This one is a mid-block temporary crossing. In addition, here is they built temporary temporary crossing here with ramps that get people from the sidewalk level down to the level of the surface. Two diversions. One that we saw early in TA28, which shows the diversion in the parking lane, and the other one, space available, you run the diversion on the back side of the workspace, out of the street traffic, and making it better for everyone. And with that, I appreciate your time and look forward to addressing any questions that may come. Thank you.
I think we have time for just one question. We're running a bit late, but if we could, I'll answer this one. What options do agencies have when there's no way to avoid placing a temporary sign in a sidewalk, such as urban areas with wide sidewalks? Do portable sign leg stands automatically constitute a tripping hazard? Michelle, do you want to start that, or?
Sure. Yeah, so we have seen kind of a box type of thing built around portable sign stands to give that detectable edge. There are also sign stands. We've seen some wooden sign stands that already have that like 2x6 kind of detectable edge around the base. So I think there are some non-proprietary kind of options. I don't think that there are any proprietary options that would have that detectable edge yet. So yeah, I think it'll take some creativity potentially to do that.
The only thing I would add is that it's really important to look at the site and see if there's some place that sign could be positioned so that it's not in the walking way. And the walking way needs to be, at least 48 to hopefully 60 inches wide, the walking way on the sidewalk, so that hopefully that will be able to accommodate a sign placed on either side of that.
Thank you all. I wish we had time to address more questions, but we'll capture those. Go ahead, Martha.
Martha, we're missing your audio, just FYI. Okay, well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and transition to our next session. This session will end, and go back to your hub and click on your next link for mental health intervention. We'll see you in a moment.